us. This is the Hearts and Minds segment. Felix Salmon, who's been a journalist for so many years and has been on my radar forever. He just says it how it is, and that's why I'm excited to have him here. As you can see, Axios is one of my favorite sources to get content. And I know the people there, including the founders, and they are all looking at news and media in a really interesting, innovative way that all makes us smarter, faster, better, etc. So I want to talk about media today. I want to talk about some of the things that Felix has been thinking about, because he's thinking about all the time. And if you follow him on Twitter at felixsalmon.com, every second he has something to say. So Felix, thanks for being here. I'm just going to show your the site on Axios, which basically can illuminate just some of the stories that you've written in the last few weeks. And you also have a podcast, right, Felix? Are you there?
Slate Money. It's cool.
There you go.
Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
And at Axios.com, you could sign up to Felix's
Axios
newsletter.
Edge is the name of the newsletter, yeah.
Yes, and it comes out every Thursday. Yes. Felix, can I ask you a question? Because do you have time to go over? It's fine if you don't.
Yeah, sure.
All right, cool. All right, so everybody cancel your meeting afterwards, and let's have some fun. All right, Felix, I'm going to stop share so we can see you. Thanks.
Hello.
Good haircut, by the way. Did you? And where are you right now?
Downtown Manhattan.
Oh, I'm in Manhattan now too. Oh, by the way, I love doing this. If everybody could just type in where you're from. We have like almost 40 people on today, which is amazing. So type in chat where you're from. I love doing that. All right, Felix. So Axios. Why don't you explain what Axios is if I didn't do it justice?
I think you did a perfectly good job. It's basically we look at the world and we tell you everything that you need to know and nothing that you don't need to know in the minimum amount of time that we can manage to squeeze it all into.
And what gave Mike and the other partners, and you're probably an early hire as well, or partner maybe. Everybody's a partner, right?
We're all shareholders. I don't know if we're partners.
Well, good. Good luck. I'm sure you'll all succeed. So what is the reason why Axios came into being? What was like the white space that the founders saw?
Basically, I think it was the founders mostly came from Politico, and Politico, as you know, is very fast twitch, and it's like, who won the morning, who won the afternoon, what's the latest microscoop, and it's really great if you're a political junkie or you really care about that kind of thing, but it's way too insidery for the vast majority of people, and it's also a relatively narrow subject matter. I think what they realized was that in a world where there's just enormous amounts of information, there's a real need that people have to just get taken straight to what matters. And don't give me anecdotal leads, don't give me narratives, don't give me long discursive stories. Just tell me what I need to know, tell me what's new, tell me why it matters, and then let me get on with my life because I am busy. And if you can get me caught up on stuff super quickly, there's just, in a very reliable way and in a scoopy way that will break news as well as just tell you what other people are saying. Then,
right, you're not aggregating, you're actually doing.
Well, we are aggregating, we do both.
And
like in a weird way, the audience doesn't care whether you broke the news or not, right? It's important to be out there, well-sourced in the world so that you understand what's going on and who to believe and who to trust and who not to believe. Whenever there's a White House scoop, 6 times out of 7, probably Jonathan Swan will be on Slack saying, yeah, don't ignore this one, it's crap, because we have the expertise necessary to be able to do that. But by the same token, if something important does happen, we're going to be out there saying, this is important, this is why it matters. We're not going to sort of ignore it just because we didn't break it. our mantra is very much reader first. And so we'll give you what you need to know. And a huge part of that is not giving you what you don't need to know. Like
And
what
how
we
do you
don't print is
distinguish?
massively important.
How do you distinguish between the two, what you need to know and what you don't need to know?
Just like, but we have one question which we try to apply to everything we write, which is why it matters. Like, tell me something, then tell me why it matters. What you often find with a lot of stories is that if you ask yourself, why does this matter? You don't really come up with a very compelling answer. And so if you can't answer why it matters question in a very sort of concise and compelling way, that's a really strong indication that the story probably doesn't matter and that maybe the audience doesn't need to, we don't need to use up our audience's precious time by inflicting it upon them.
So yeah, so that you have to understand why it matters, basically, and why it matters in terms of like the reader, or just, you know, how do, I would just want to dig one step deeper. How do you figure out if it matters or not?
Well, I mean, we have different newsletters which cover different industries. So, you know, it might be, why does it matter to this industry? It might mean, why does it matter to the reader? You know, I'm a financial journalist by trade, and I am naturally mistrustful of this trope that you find in a lot of business journalism, which is like, well, why does this matter to the reader? Like, you know, I'll be writing about like, you know, the structure of the yield curve or something like that. And this is like important stuff which helps to govern the growth of the economy and the whole world. But like, not everything needs to come back to sort of like who's going to be the next president, or you know, how much money I'm going to make. It doesn't need to be personally important, but it does need to have some kind of an impact on the world that really matters and makes a difference.
All right, so let's shift to some of the stories that you've been working on. I showed a few. What are some of the things that are really top of mind for you right now that you really want to find out and know what matters for your audience?
So one of the things I'm really looking at right now is this new law that China has promulgated in Hong Kong, and the effect that that may or may not have on, not only on Hong Kong, but basically on any company in the world that does business in China, which is virtually every country. So certainly every big company in the world. Mm-hmm. There's this provision of the law which basically says that it applies to everyone on the planet. It applies to you, it applies to me, even if we're here in the United States, for whatever country we're in, whatever passport we hold, we are subject to this law, and we can break this law. Now, in practice, if we break this law by posting, you know, pro-democracy sentiments on Twitter, say, from the comfort of our couch in Manhattan, there's no Chinese SWAT team who's going to come down on, you know, from helicopters and arrest us. But if at any point we ever do go to China, and most of us do go to China on, you know, every so often, COVID notwithstanding, right, at that point we will be criminals because we will have broken the law. We will have broken Chinese law, and they can arrest us. Now, the fact is, the Chinese can arrest anyone in China for just about any reason or no reason. They've been doing that with Canadian nationals recently, as I'm sure you know. But this is an escalation of that, and it's part of what you linked to previously from the FBI, basically saying that the Chinese are trying to use every tool at their disposal to become the second hegemonic power in the world. And having this kind of degree of extraterritoriality built into their legal system is definitely part of how the US projects its power globally, and it looks like it might become part of how the Chinese project their power globally as well.
You said in Axios, I don't think it was you, but maybe it was Brittany who does it. She does the China beat.
Bethany.
Bethany, yeah. Thank you. You know, she talked about a story about how there was like a Chinese student who tweeted or said something, a Chinese student in America, or student in America from China, who said something against the Chinese government, and then when he went back, he was arrested. Is that something that?
Right, and you don't even need to be Chinese. Like, yeah, they don't, like, so long as you're in China, they can arrest you.
Right. As long as you're in, so if I say something and I go to China, they could arrest me, basically.
Right. Yeah.
That's crazy. So, all right. So what are some of the other things that's on your mind right now?
So I was actually very interested in what you said about the PPP, because I think there's this really interesting sort of perceptions gap when it comes to the PPP, that you are like, well, look at the people who got it and the people who didn't get it, and look who managed to get the money and the people who are left out, and there is a very broad sense, I think, when yesterday there was a lot of talk about the people who got it, and they were like, and there, a lot of the rhetoric surrounding that was like, think who got this money, who the needier people who could have received this money and didn't, which I think is all based on a bunch of chaos that happened at the beginning of the rollout, before it was re-upped. The fact is, there's the fact is there's $130 billion left over in the PPP. That basically everyone who applied for it got it. That you do not have a large number of people who were left out, who didn't get it, who wanted it and weren't able to apply. It's always possible to find one or two here or there, sure, but you don't have there was in the end no fiscal constraint on this. They had more money than they knew what to do with, and they've extended it even further in the hope that more people will apply for it. But it's very easy to turn all of these things into a kind of zero-sum game and say, well, look at all these rich people, Kanye and people like that, who applied for the PPP, and it's like, well, yeah, he did, but that doesn't mean that he got money that would have otherwise gone to someone else, because there's a whole bunch of money left over. But we are in this very kind of feverish time right now, in this febrile time of COVID, where everyone is feeling particularly righteous about more or less everything. And so, yeah, I think that it was almost inevitable that when the list of names came out, there was going to be a bunch of righteousness on Twitter from the likes of Cindy Gallop.
Okay, so you disagree with her?
I mean, I think she's just factually wrong.
Because you're saying everybody who basically applied was able to get it. And yeah. Okay. What about, I got a couple emails about people who are, upset that the big brands got some when they didn't really need it. Is that?
I have no idea which big brands you're talking about. There was a handful of restaurant chains who got it, but that was about it.
Right. Okay. Any other stories? Any other things on your mind? What do you think about, what's in your heart and mind right now about the whole COVID situation? I mean, we've seen, I keep saying.
Well, as I say, I think we're super feverish right now. I think we're super, there was what's his name, Dolnick in the New York Times today was talking about parentheses and how we're in this weird. It feels like someone opened a parenthesis and we have no idea when or how it's going to be closed, right? We're in this liminal state, and liminal states, but
yeah, what's a liminal?
So I don't know if you know much about Rites of Passage and this guy Arnold van Gennep, who more or less came up with the idea. But whenever you have a major transition in life, there's nearly always a rite of passage associated with it. You have the pre-state, and then you have the rite of passage, and then you have the post-state. And the rite of passage, whether it's a wedding or a bar mitzvah or you name it, some kind of weird ritual where you go out into the desert for 40 days and almost die, whatever it is, it has a very clearly defined end, and the ceremony itself, the liminal state, the in-between state, is kind of uncomfortable. No one feels very natural during it, and they all kind of breathe a sigh of relief when it's over, right? When if you go to a wedding and the officiant says, "Well, you may now kiss the bride," there's this big sort of sigh of, "Oh, phew!" That's done, that's over. Now we can go party, because we've got to the end, we've got to the other side, and what we're experiencing right now is a really uncomfortable feeling of being in the middle of this state with no end in sight. And we have no idea when we're going to be able to sort of exhale and go back to normal, or whether that's going to be the case, or how that's going to be the case. And so everything is fraught, everything is extremely emotional, everything has become very righteous. And there have been definitely positive aspects of that, you know, like the whole broad embrace of Black Lives Matter would never have happened, I don't think, without that kind of feeling, that emotionality that the country is on edge. Like, there's a massive difference, as you know, in the broad social acceptance of Black Lives Matter among white folks compared, you know, in 2020 versus 2014 when it started. And so that's good, but there's just also this much broader feeling of feverishness in the country as a whole and the world as a whole, but mostly in the countries where COVID is still raging, like the UK and the US and Brazil, where you kind of feel like anything is possible in a kind of dangerous way. And I think there's much more danger in the world. I don't know if you've seen the shooting stats are way up, the homicide stats are way up. Yeah, so it's a very, very uncomfortable state to be in, and I think that is
domestic abuse, like, you know, mental health issues, domestic abuse, and
yep. So yeah, that I think is this sort of like background noise to everything else that's going on right now, and it's important to just kind of look at the world through that lens and realize how incredibly unusual and artificial the current situation is.
And is there any hope?
No, I mean, we're not going to get out of this until, like, we close the parenthesis, and that's not going to happen until we have some kind of herd immunity through a vaccine, and no one has a clue, like, when that might happen, how that might happen, how we're going to get enough doses of the vaccine, how we're going to persuade people to take the vaccine. All of these things are deeply unknown. But like, what is clear is that we have absolutely no hope or plan for reducing the prevalence of the virus in society. Like, every other country has been able to do it pretty much, but we haven't.
What is your opinion? Why, or why not?
It's because we have a weak and untrusted federal government. Like, there were a million things the federal government could and should have done and didn't do. And yeah, the fault really lies with them.
Okay. I'm also really interested in some of the stuff that you've been talking about in terms of the Jeffrey Epstein. You were kind of like on that what I mean, it's such a story and it's in your world, but if you're on Axios Edge and you're talking about, and there's so many different types, you have such a broad scope of the subjects, but why, was that like an obsession for you? Did that come from your own volition that you wanted to, because you did an amazing job and you really illuminated really what that whole thing was about? And so
yeah, and you know, obviously the second shoe, we're going to see how much the second shoe drops now that Ghislaine Maxwell has been arrested. I mean, literally, I'm looking out my window. You can't see my window because you're looking at me, but if you could see what I'm looking at the MCC, the jail where Epstein killed himself, or didn't, depending on what you believe.
Well, you know, you don't have to say.
But yeah, I've been fascinated by the Epstein brothers for many years. I spent a lot of time investigating and writing about Cooper Union, which is this college here in downtown Manhattan, where the chairman of the board was Mark Epstein, Jeffrey's brother, and there was a lot of financial shenanigans going on there, and no one really understood where Mark got his money, and there was a lot of people talking about Jeffrey even back then. And so, yeah, I kept on following those things. I had a few connections at the MIT Media Lab, and so that whole story blew up, and I was interested in that. It turned out that Jeffrey Epstein was basically making donations to the Media Lab by sort of laundering them through Leon Black and Bill Gates, which is a crazy story, which I think has gone really unexamined. What is absolutely astonishing to me is that although Prince Andrew has sort of suffered the consequences, or suffered some consequences, for palling around with Jeffrey Epstein, a lot of other very, very rich and important men like Leon Black, like Bill Gates, like Larry Summers, like the list goes on, who have very documented relationships with this guy, seem to have suffered no ill effects whatsoever, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah, so that'll be a story that you're going to continue now that Ghislaine was just arrested. For anybody who doesn't really understand that story or not into it, Jeffrey Epstein was somebody who is accused for sex trafficking and raping underage women and having this relationship with many rich and powerful men, and actually, worked with a woman named Ghislaine Maxwell, who was his person who sought out and trained these women. He went to jail, and like Felix said, that he either killed himself or whatever you believe. Very rich man. But I know many of the people on the call might not know this, so if you want, just read Felix's work. The other story that I just think is really interesting that that you mentioned, everybody's talking about Facebook, right? And the Facebook boycott. I mentioned it as well, from brands, right? You said something really interesting about how, and I read in your newsletter about how brands are actually, they might use this time or see if actually Facebook is effective. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, brands have been very suspicious about social media in general and Facebook in particular for some time now. It's never really proven itself as a great place for brand advertisers, and brand advertisers are not actually that important to Facebook. The top 100 advertisers only account for about 6% of Facebook's ad revenue. The vast majority of advertisers on Facebook are like small local businesses, or as you say, like D2C companies, which don't have the budget to really do big brand advertising. But once you grow to that big size of being able to do brand advertising and wanting to do brand advertising, Facebook becomes something which you kind of feel like you have to be on it, but you don't really quite understand why. And every so often you'll find companies like Adidas or Procter & Gamble coming out and saying, well, we just slashed like $200 million off our social ad spend and it had no visible effect on anything, and I don't know why we're bothering to spend it. Or like, Google search ad spend or that kind of stuff. A lot of the money that is being gobbled up by the duopoly, by Facebook and Google, is really, it's long tail stuff, and the brands, I think, are becoming increasingly suspicious of it. And so when you had Color of Change and the Anti-Defamation League and all of these other people, sleeping giants, coming along to the brands and saying, we want you to boycott Facebook for the month of July, they were really pushing at an open door. A lot of these brands were like, yeah, well, that's a great idea. We'll boycott Facebook for the month of July, and it'll be a great natural experiment to see if anything actually changes and if it hurts us at all. And there's a good chance that it really won't.
Do you think individuals are going to boycott Facebook now? Or do you think it's just something, because, we heard today that, people who are running civil rights groups, et cetera, don't think Facebook's doing enough. In fact, Facebook, they had this meeting, right? And they basically failed at what they wanted. So do you think that this will transfer not just with brands, but consumers in terms of?
So there's been like low level, I know dozens of people who aren't on Facebook or who deleted their Facebook accounts.
But this was before.
I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
Right. And this has never been enough to, move the needle in terms of Facebook. I think there's this fallacy when it comes to boycotts, that like the way that a boycott works is that everyone joins the boycott. No one, does any business with the company being boycotted the company being boycotted thereby loses lots of business, loses lots of revenue, gets crippled, and has to change its ways or go out of business. And like that is really not how boycotts have ever worked. Like with the possible exception of the boycott on South African goods in the 1980s during apartheid, like that for normal companies, that's really not how it works. It's much more of a PR campaign. It's not a bottom line thing. And there's like, people are welcome to delete their Facebook accounts. It won't really make any difference to Facebook's revenues, because the fact is Facebook knows who you are, whether you have a Facebook account or not. My former colleague Kashmir Hill has written a lot about this, and people who have never had Facebook accounts, let alone people who've deleted their Facebook accounts, still get ads targeted at them every day by Facebook. And Facebook knows exactly who they are, and they know exactly who their friends are, and what their social graph is. Everyone is indexed by Facebook at this point, whether you have a Facebook account or not. And I think a lot of people don't realize the degree to which you are exposed to Facebook, to ads that ultimately make Facebook money, even if you never download the app, you never go to facebook.com, and you never, even if you never go to Instagram. Like a lot of people don't even realize that Instagram is owned by Facebook. But even if you never
and
use
WhatsApp
any of those,
too, right? WhatsApp.
Well, WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, but it so far doesn't have advertising, so it's not a major revenue source of Facebook. What it does do is it helps Facebook understand those social graphs. So if you're like on a WhatsApp group with a bunch of friends who are on Facebook, then Facebook can use that information to sort of triangulate you and your device and work out that when you visit a website and they'll serve you an ad on a completely unrelated website, they'll know exactly who you are, who your friends are, what your interests are, what kind of ad to serve you. So yeah, like the idea that boycotting Facebook is like something that's going to harm Facebook, I think is another one of those fallacies that people don't really understand.
All right, one last subject, because we're on that. What do you think about what's going to happen with the desire of regulations and to break up these big tech companies? Do you have an opinion on that?
So yeah, I think that's definitely the direction that we're moving in. Certainly not under this administration, but potentially under the next one. Facebook does get a huge amount of monopoly value from owning Instagram and WhatsApp, and Google gets a huge amount of monopoly value from owning YouTube and Google Maps. And so like if you break those things up and you start creating competition between them, competition for advertisers, competition for users, that can only be helpful. It's not obvious to me that would be harmful to anyone, and it would help to break up some of the obscene scale that these massive global companies have. We live in a world where people sort of mutter under their breath about someone like Twitter. Oh, and he has 300 or 400 million users. That's nothing. That's not real scale. You can't really compete with that. In order to be a real force in social, you need to have 1 billion users or 2 billion users or something completely insane like that. And that just cannot be healthy. You become you wind up with a degree of power that's almost greater than many sovereign states. Because there's literally no country in the world that has as many people as Facebook has users.
That's really
not even China.
How many users do they have right now, Facebook?
Well, it depends how you count, but it's definitely in the billions.
Huh. And so what do you think about TikTok then? In terms of, are they could they grow as big as Facebook? It seems like their audience is growing.
Well, I mean, yeah, the growth is easy. To get to Facebook scale, no, you can't get to Facebook scale from TikTok alone. And they're certainly not going to get to Facebook scale if they're banned in India, which they are. Right. And also they've never actually been in China, which is something I think a lot of people don't understand. Like TikTok it used to be an app called Musical.ly, which was bought by ByteDance, and then it got rebranded as TikTok. ByteDance, the parent company, has a very similar app in China, whose name I forget. And they basically took that software and that algorithm and they ported it onto the Musical.ly base. But TikTok has no users in China, and it's now been banned in India. Those are the two most populous countries in the world. So no, TikTok is not going to become as big as Facebook. It's impossible.
Could you explain why they decided not to, why to end their, the platform in Hong Kong just recently?
Right, because Hong Kong is now, ever since this new law came in, Hong Kong is basically the mainland. It's basically China. The whole one country, two systems thing has gone right out the window. And so if you're not in China, then you shouldn't be in Hong Kong. So since they're not in China, they were like, we're getting out of Hong Kong too.
Interesting. So they really are defining, like you said, that ByteDance is so China has access to ByteDance information, but ByteDance owns TikTok, but TikTok's not in China. So it's pretty confusing, right?
So Mike Pompeo is hinting very strongly that China has access to all of the data on TikTok users. TikTok, vehemently denies this and says it's not true, and that all of the information is held in the United States, and there's all manner of firewalls, and that China has no access to it at all. And so, believe who you want on that one. But you know much more about TikTok than I do, because it's run by your friend Kevin.
Oh, Kevin Mayer. Yeah, Disney. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, he's basically telling, the United States government that, it's a great platform and they're not doing anything, giving anything to China. So, he just had a statement that was just released, I think, yesterday. So
do you believe him?
I don't know. I'm not, no comment. I don't think anybody believes anybody right now, right? We're kind of like in this world of distrust. Nobody knows what's happening. So last question, which is a positive question that's being asked by Erica Berger, who is also a journalist. And she is wondering if you are all hiring, and I know this isn't your job, but are you hiring a head of social good partnerships and impact?
No. She's saying that TikTok is doing that.
Oh, so are you? Oh, thank you. So is TikTok going to do? Yeah, no.
This is
laugh out loud. Sorry.
This is Kevin Mayer basically doing his performative something, and like saying, oh well, so long as I have a head of social good partnerships and impact, and I'm on the side of the angels.
Okay. Well, thank you for asking that. Can we end on a positive note?
No, there's really nothing positive in the world.
All right. Well, the one thing that's positive is that you came on, Lindsay Nkrumah. That's a positive thing. I think their magazine's going to do well, and entrepreneurs.
Entrepreneurs is just I've always been a little bit suspicious about this valorization of entrepreneurs. It's a very American thing.
Like Fast Company,
there's a lot of in the development world, there's a lot of talk about quote unquote micro entrepreneurs,
yes.
but a lot of entrepreneurship, and one of the reasons why you do see a lot of entrepreneurship in the Black community and all of this kind of stuff, it's precisely that it's what you do if you can't get a job, right? I mean, most people, especially in this country, they really like things like health insurance. They like job stability. They like knowing that they can make their mortgage payments for the next few years without having to worry about where that money is coming from. Like steady jobs and employment are wonderful things, and they're good things, and especially unionized jobs with job security are good things. And I think we should be valorizing good union jobs more than we should be valorizing entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is basically, shit, I can't get a good job with job security. I'm going to have to do this all on myself and take a huge amount of risk onto myself, which I don't necessarily want to take, right? Yeah, of course, there's not a possibility that I'm going to wind up making millions of dollars, and that would be awesome. But I would actually quite happily give up that possibility of making millions of dollars if I knew that I would be able to make rent for the rest of my life. And so that like having good employment prospects is much more important than entrepreneurship, I think.
Interesting. Well, I mean, the whole notion of entrepreneurship, and when everybody was on the cover of Fast Company, like it was Vogue, and they were showing a celebrity, basically started, and during and right after the financial crisis, because most millennials couldn't get jobs, so they kind of took it in their own hands to start.
And like if you look at the sort of the classic sort of demographic makeup of the valorized entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, it's generally like childless white guys on the one hand. It's people like anyone from Mark Zuckerberg to Bill Gates, who like drop out of university and start a company when they have nothing to lose and no real responsibilities and no families to support or anything like that, so they can take those risks. Or else it's people who've made a bunch of money already in Silicon Valley through like stock options or whatever, and they've got lucky, and so now they have enough of a financial cushion to be able to go out and take those risks. And it's an inherently highly risky thing to do. And yeah, sure, if you have no children, if you have like no dependents, if you have no parents who you need to support, and if you have none of those worries, or if you have so much money that kind of thing doesn't matter, then entrepreneurship looks quite attractive. It's like a lot of upside and the downside is relatively small. But for most people, that's not the case.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see what happens now, because a lot of entrepreneurs are definitely out of business now. So they're going to want to look for jobs. There are going to be fewer jobs. So they might have to be entrepreneurs, but there's no money. So it's going to be an interesting, it'll be interesting to see what happens in that whole conversation.